What if Palpatine manipulated Obi-Wan instead of Anakin? What would happen then? Let's find out. Part 1. The Present. 22 standard years after the Clone Wars. Through the massive, curved, transparent steel viewport to his right, Luke watched Coruscant's federal district unfold beneath them, a tapestry of artificial light against the night sky. Chancellor Amidala's diplomatic cruiser, a 40-meter vessel whose silver chrome hull reflected the glow of countless buildings with that distinctive Naboo polish, sailed through the empty traffic lane. Flanking the elegant craft fore and aft were bulkier security corvettes, 3 positioned in triangular formation at each end, each vessel nearly 4 times the cruiser's length, their darker hulls and angular construction marking them as Republic military vessels of an entirely different pedigree. The traffic corridor had been cleared as standard protocol, a pocket of emptiness cutting through the planet's otherwise congested skylanes. Near the cruiser's forward cockpit section, the Golden Republic emblem gleamed prominently against the chrome finish, its circular form unchanged across decades even as its meaning had evolved with the shifting tides of power, a symbol that had outlasted the very ideals it was designed to represent. Below, the Linaso Memorial Park swept past, one of the few places on the endless city planet where imported trees and curated gardens created the illusion of nature. Atmospheric illumination picked out the foliage against the surrounding urban landscape. Luke realized he hadn't walked its paths in years. Beyond this fragile sanctuary, nighttime Coruscant stretched toward infinity, its lights beyond counting coalescing into one radiant continuum that dared rival the stars above with its own counterfeit cosmos. He pulled his gaze from the hypnotic vista and gathered his resolve, shoulders squaring imperceptibly beneath his dark, formal attire. To his left, his mother, Supreme Chancellor for over 2 decades, sat absorbed in her datapad. Her fingertips caught the subtle glow from the screen as she scrolled through what appeared to be details for the evening's art exhibition, the Mabra collection, opening in the Federal District's art sector, arranged by her longtime ally, Mon Mothma. The cabin around them balanced power with restraint. Burnished wood paneling housed recessed lighting, while illuminated niches showcased select Naboo artifacts. 2 facing benches upholstered in midnight blue Alderaanian shimmer silk were separated by a low lacquered table. Luke and Padmé occupied one bench, him by the viewport, her to his left, while the opposite remained empty. Her ceremonial headdress rested on the table. She wore traditional Naboo attire, a golden yellow gown with intricate patterning, comfortable homeworld dress. She was beyond needing elaborate displays of power. Luke drew a steadying breath, grabbed his datapad, and turned to face his mother. He paused, observing her profile as she scrolled through whatever currently demanded her attention. The cabin was quiet except for the elegant notes of Naboo chamber music drifting through the speakers. He knew this conversation might hit turbulence. Before he could frame his opening words, she severed his preparation. "What's up?" she asked without looking up. "Got something to tell you," Luke said. Padmé's right hand found his shoulder, a gesture of supposed attention, while her eyes remained fixed on her datapad. "What is it?" Luke recognized the move for what it was, her standard tactic for creating the illusion of engagement while her focus remained elsewhere. "Are you just putting your hand on my shoulder to pretend you're listening?" he challenged, not bothering to hide his irritation. "I might be," Padmé admitted, her lips curving into an amused smile as she continued scanning the screen. "But you're not supposed to point that out. Terribly impolite of you." "Will you please listen?" Luke asked. With a subtle sigh of resignation, Padmé removed her hand from Luke's shoulder. Her thumb found the power button along the datapad's upper edge. The device responded with a soft chime as she set it down to her left, its smooth display fading to dark. She pivoted to give Luke her full attention. "Fine, what is it? I'm all ears." Luke navigated to a photo on his datapad and turned the screen toward her. "I want you to meet someone." The image showed Luke beside a striking woman with vibrant red hair, their faces pressed close together. Her green eyes sparkled as she leaned into Luke's shoulder, both of them smiling with the glow of romance. Padmé wore that look, the blend of resignation and patience a mother might wear when watching a toddler attempt to balance on furniture, despite repeated tumbles. She'd displayed identical forbearance during Luke's previous, serious relationships, each of which had conveniently unraveled shortly after comprehensive background checks and surveillance dossiers materialized on her terminal. "At least let me explain first," Luke said, catching her look. "Did I say anything?" Padmé asked, feigning innocence. "You were going to." "I didn't say anything." Luke shook his head and launched into the story of how he'd met this woman, Mara Jade, at one of Leda Mothma's soirees. As he spoke about their relationship, Padmé's thoughts wandered elsewhere. At his age, she and Anakin hadn't been attending glamorous gatherings. They'd been doing what necessity demanded, things they'd ensured Luke and his sister would never face. The thought pulled her mind away from his story. "You're not even listening anymore, are you?" Luke asked, catching the faraway look in her eyes. "Of course I am," Padmé replied, snapping back to the present. She gestured at the image with both hands. Sharp, straight, parallel. "I'm completely absorbed in your epic love story." Her words landed wrong. Luke's face fell, wounded pride mixing with visible indignation. He stared at her, waiting for something more sincere. Padmé held his gaze, fighting it, but something about his earnest offense, the way he looked so genuinely hurt, like a child denied a treat, broke through her composure. A chuckle escaped her. She brought her hand to her mouth, trying to contain it, but her eyes gave her away. Luke's interest in continuing his story evaporated. "You know what, my mistake, for bringing anything to you ever," he said bitterly. He delivered it with such affronted sincerity, as though she'd committed some grave injustice, that it only made things worse. "Hey," she attempted through her laughter, trying and failing to compose herself. "I should have just gone to Anakin." His father's first name came naturally. Neither Luke nor Leia had experienced traditional parenthood. Their formative years unfolded on Naboo under Aunt Sola, Padmé's sister, while their biological parents existed only as distant figures, materializing on holocalls. When finally summoned at 15 to join the galactic rulers, the formal titles of mother and father felt hollow. Applying such designations to these powerful strangers seemed almost comical. They'd defaulted to first names instead, and neither Anakin nor Padmé had considered the matter important enough to correct. The laughter subsiding, Padmé eased back against her seat. She could predict exactly how this would play out if Luke went to Anakin instead. Her husband would present the supportive facade. "Sure, Luke, you'll always make the best choices. You and her make a good match. Keep me posted." Then contact her the moment Luke left his sight, casually mentioning their son's new romantic interest and suggesting she look into it. The pattern was familiar, but Luke didn't need to know that. "He'd tell you to follow your heart," Padmé said after a moment. "But Luke, listen to me. Is it too much to ask?" Luke's voice rose. "To be treated like an adult when I bring you something that matters to me?" Padmé held up both hands in surrender and turned her attention back to the image still displayed on Luke's datapad. "Luke, Mara Jade?" She raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a real name to me. What's next? Lara Emerald? Crystal Sapphire? Ruby Diamond? Opal Amethyst? Pearl Topaz? Amber Quartz? Garnet Obsidian?" She paused as if thinking. "Coral Moonstone? Citrine Onyx? Oh, I know. Jade Ruby. That one's practically her cousin." She witnessed Luke's stricken look, the amusement drained from her voice, replaced by something more serious. "Luke, please, look at her. You think a woman like that sniffing around because she likes your personality?" "What are you saying?" Luke demanded. "We're not exactly nobodies, as I'm sure you've gathered," she replied, tilting her head toward their opulent surroundings. "That makes you a target. People cultivate relationships to extract favors, wealth, connections." A dismissive glance at the image. "That's what MJ over here is after." "You're wrong about her," Luke insisted. "She's never asked for anything like that." Padmé scoffed. "Maybe she's good at hiding it. A word to the not-so-wise about your precious gem. Do what you need to with her, then broom her fast." "You're so caught up in your..." Luke's hands gestured futilely as he struggled to put his outrage into words. "You're cynical. This whole..." He kept starting and stopping, unable to form the powerful statement he wanted to make. When Padmé began to laugh at his stammering, something in him gave way. Forget it. He looked away. The vast cityscape beyond the viewport held nothing, but it asked nothing either. Light from a colossal holographic billboard washed over his face, some performer's image bathed in amethyst light, illuminating, then abandoning him in the span of a breath. Padmé's voice gentled. "Hey, look at me." Luke didn't turn. "Are you crying?" she inquired. "No. What's wrong with you?" Luke snapped, whirling to face her. "I'm sorry if I made you cry." "Will you shut up? Nobody made anybody cry." Okay, Padmé said, her hand finding his shoulder again. "Though you can come cry to me, you know. I'm your mother. I wish I could have cried to mine. She wouldn't even care if I died that evil..." She stopped herself, cutting off whatever word was about to follow. Luke tilted his head back against the seat, staring at the cabin ceiling. If he could go back 5 minutes and stop himself from ever starting this conversation, he would. The ornate panel stared back, offering no escape. Listen, even if she's sincere, Luke, you're immortal and frozen in your 20s. How would this even work? Luke seized the opening immediately. We can do it for her too. Padmé snorted. Just do it for her? Brilliant plan. Shall we all gather in a circle, chant mystically, and bestow the gift of eternal youth? The amusement left her face. Hard practicality settled in. It's an expensive process, and the price is not paid in credits. And consider the optics. If suddenly everyone in our orbit stops aging, don't you think people might question why the Force gods seem suspiciously fixated on the Amidala Skywalker social circle? How many beings does the Force supposedly need to guide the galaxy through technological stagnation and bring about everlasting peace? I don't care, Luke shot back. Maybe I'll just give up my immortality. The words came from anger, a desire to wound her the way she'd just wounded him. We'll die before we let you do that. Her voice was fierce, but then it changed, matching his spite. And besides, it's clear you're going through a phase. This isn't real love. Your father literally developed asthma from loving me. He couldn't breathe from how much he loved me. I'm not making this up. He told me himself. That's real. Your little infatuation won't last 3 weeks, I promise. Luke's anger intensified. I don't need your permission. We'll elope. Mara Jade Amidala Skywalker. Nice ring to it. Quite the mouthful, don't you think? Though I suppose that's irrelevant, since eloping would require signing a marriage agreement. And there are certain prerequisites for one to be able to sign a legally enforceable contract. All parties must possess legal capacity, meaning they're of sound mind, free from undue influence or coercion, and capable of understanding the nature and consequences of the agreement they're entering. Her eyes never left his face. Mental competency evaluations can be requested by concerned parties. Family members, for instance. Mothers who might attest that their son lacks the judgment to enter into binding agreements without being easily manipulated. She smiled pleasantly. Standard legal protections, really. Stars above, Luke breathed, retreating into his datapad. He was done with this conversation. This was why arguing with a politician, successful ones at least, was pointless. Padmé picked up her own datapad, appearing to review something, though her attention remained partly on him. Don't feel too bad, Padmé said with a dismissive shrug. By 14, I was routinely outmaneuvering veteran politicians and trade delegates at negotiation tables. In fact, your grandfather enrolled me in those politics classes precisely because I talked back too much and consistently won every argument. Infuriated him. He thought the classes would humble me. I was 12, I believe. When you were 12, you were... She waved her hand vaguely, making a show of searching her memory. Ah, yes. Throwing rocks at lizards in Aunt Sola's garden. Her tone softened with mock encouragement. Don't worry, you'll get better at this if you try. I'm sure. Luke turned sharply to her. The mockery of a childhood she'd had no part in stung worse than anything else she'd said. They'd sent him and his sister to Naboo shortly after birth. 10 minutes after you were born, and Sabé had let slip more than once, never without bitterness. How would you know what I did at 12? You shipped us off. Remember? Again. She faced him, jaw tight. Coruscant isn't a good place for young minds to develop. We brought you both here as soon as we could. How many times would they have this argument? They couldn't pause galactic conquest to explain blue skies to children. Luke had inherited everything they'd bled for. Power, position, security, without lifting a finger. Yet still he found reasons to complain. The circular argument again, the galaxy's most predictable orbit. 15 years. Luke's hand sliced through the air between them. You didn't even talk to us for 15 years. Do you know what that... His voice fractured on the last word. He drew a breath that didn't quite fill his lungs. I know why. Intellectually, I understand all the reasons. But that doesn't change how I feel. You threw us away like trash. Luke, Padmé snapped, slamming her datapad down. Stop saying hurtful things to me. You'll feel very bad later. And seriously, threw you away? We made a difficult decision. Both of us for your safety. You like to make me out to be some unhinged monster, don't you? While treating your father like he's some benevolent god who can do no wrong. He's not as crazy as you, Luke said, turning back toward the viewport. What was that, Luke? Her eyes bored into the side of his face. I didn't quite catch it. Luke's attention stayed on the passing lights outside. The fury drained from Padmé's face as quickly as it had appeared. She'd seen this pattern before, the argument spiraling, Luke retreating, then weeks of silence between them. Tedious, pointless. She exhaled slowly, changing tactics. Family stories, he loved those, though he'd sooner eat glass than admit it. She'd caught him more than once. pretending disinterest while hanging on every word when she spoke of the early days. And this particular tale would settle the question of which parent was crazier quite definitively, and get them past this whole mess without either of them having to apologize. You know what, my son? Let me tell you a little story about your father. By the end, you will see that we are both the same level of crazy, as you put it. Despite himself, Luke turned back to order, trying to appear merely tolerant rather than interested. A long time ago, 24 years to be specific, 2 years before you and your sister came along, Anakin and Master Yoda, Anakin's predecessor, pranked Obi-Wan Kenobi. They made him believe he was the illegitimate son of the Supreme Chancellor back then, If Palpatine. She paused, letting the absurdity sink in. Things got quite messy after that. Her eyes flickered to his. Want me to keep going, or do you want to stay mad at me a little longer? It's fine either way. Go ahead, he said, like he was doing her a favor by listening. Padmé smiled and began the story. Part 2, The Prank, 2 standard years before the Clone Wars concluded. Obi-Wan Kenobi stared at the terminal in his sparse temple quarters, hands trembling as his eyes tracked across the official communication that had arrived in his secure inbox that morning. The message bore the header of the newly established Bureau of Jedi Genealogical Documentation and Parental Accountability, an institution created after numerous Jedi offspring filed a class action lawsuit against the Order for parental abandonment. The Jedi's argument that they could create children but bore no responsibility for raising them as the Force forbade attachment had crumbled in court. The Senate mandated the creation of this registry to record genetic data of every Order member, allowing their biological children to identify their Jedi parents and force appropriate payments. Obi-Wan's situation was unusual among his peers. He'd married, a rarity in the Order. From this union came Korki Kryze, offspring of the Jedi Master and Duchess Satine of Mandalore. When the relationship soured, Satine had sought complete separation, but Kenobi, ever the negotiator, had turned even this personal defeat to his advantage. Exploiting a loophole in the Order's prohibition against personal wealth, he had structured their divorce settlement in his favor. Since Jedi appeared as paupers on all official records, courts viewed him as the financially disadvantaged party. With Satine's vast wealth as Duchess making the financial disparity clear, the courts ordered her to pay monthly alimony for maintaining his standard of living from the marriage. This legal maneuver became Obi-Wan's favorite anecdote whenever fellow Jedi bemoaned their own support payments. A smug reminder that while they scrambled to meet their obligations or risk expulsion when the Order's coffers were garnished, he'd outmaneuvered not just the system, but the formidable Duchess herself. In the 6 months since the Bureau's creation, Obi-Wan had been waiting for his first notification. Among certain circles within the Order, paternity reports had become an unofficial ranking system. Masters and Knights compared their tallies with undisguised pride. Each new claim, another point scored. With only Korki on record, and that predating the Bureau, Obi-Wan found himself awkwardly sidelined from these conversations. The absence of claims had become increasingly uncomfortable, especially considering his private conviction that Qui-Gon, had he survived, would undoubtedly be setting temple-wide records by now. So when the notification from the Bureau finally appeared in his inbox, Obi-Wan felt a flicker of anticipation. The excitement evaporated the moment he opened the message. What he found contained information far more unsettling than any paternity claim or financial obligation. Bearing the Bureau's quantum-encrypted authentication seal and triple-verified digital signature of the Chief Genealogical Assessment Officer, it detailed how Obi-Wan's genetic profile had been cross-referenced with the Senate's own genetic repository, a database established decades earlier for similar identification purposes. The results had revealed something unprecedented. Obi-Wan's biological father, If Palpatine, the Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic himself. As Obi-Wan absorbed this information, he found himself cycling through conflicting emotions, laughter giving way to tears, then back again. Questions flooded his mind. Should he feel relief at finally knowing his origins? Resentment toward a father who had abandoned him? Perhaps Palpatine had faced no choice in the matter. The Jedi Order's legal authority over Force-sensitive children was absolute and rarely challenged. And what of his mother? The doors to his quarters parted with a soft hiss, interrupting his thoughts. Master Yoda shuffled in without announcement, Anakin Skywalker following close behind. Yoda's face showed only mild interest, while concern was written across Anakin's. What Obi-Wan couldn't know was that he was witnessing the aftermath of their handiwork. Just the previous night, amidst shared bottles and unrestrained laughter. The pair had constructed the fraudulent report. Using Yoda's high-level override codes, they had infiltrated the Bureau's secure communications network, routing their fabrication through official channels, complete with authentication markers that would withstand standard verification. Their elaborate prank had succeeded beyond expectation, evidenced by Obi-Wan's pallor and trembling hands. Seeing Obi-Wan's distress, Yoda released a wheezing chuckle. Appears that premium herbs Master Obi-Wan has sampled. Too much for him it was. How embarrassing. I found my father, Master, Obi-Wan blurted out, oscillating between disbelief and elation. Anakin's concern deepened. The prank had been Yoda's brainchild, not his. Now, watching Obi-Wan's reaction, guilt twisted in his chest. A father Master Obi-Wan has, Yoda remarked, turning to look up at Anakin. Who might this be, him? His eyes held unmistakable mischief. Obi-Wan recounted the report's findings, explaining how Chancellor Palpatine was identified as his biological father. As he spoke, he offered various scenarios that might explain the abandonment, legal restrictions, political necessities, protection from enemies. But as the initial shock faded, traces of skepticism emerged in his expression. The statistical improbability seems rather significant, doesn't it? The Supreme Chancellor of all people. I wonder if there might be a technical error in the system. Yoda's croaking voice sharpened. Error? Out of the question, this is. The cross-referencing protocol between Senate and Jedi genetic databases was established through Legislative Amendment 5291B, implemented quietly, it was, during last quarter's accountability measures. His Geimer stick struck the floor with precise emphasis. These reports, 99.97% accuracy rating, they maintain. Never wrong they are. Anakin observed with growing unease as Yoda methodically countered each of Obi-Wan's logical doubts. The Grand Master fabricated elaborate procedural safeguards and technical specifications with such confidence that Anakin found himself nearly convinced by information he knew to be entirely fictional. He watched as Obi-Wan's resistance gradually eroded. The Jedi Master wanted, perhaps needed, to believe he'd found his origins. Yoda's unwavering certainty provided the permission Obi-Wan required to accept what his rational mind might otherwise question. Meet with your father immediately, you should, Yoda declared with an air of absolute finality. A reunion long overdue, this is. I think we should consider, Anakin ventured, his discomfort finally overriding his reluctance to speak. Yoda's Geimer stick connected with Anakin's shin in a gentle, precise strike. Silent you will remain, the Grand Master muttered through clenched teeth before projecting his voice again. Visit his father, Master Kenobi must. Accompany him we shall, without delay. Within the hour, the trio had secured an audience in the Supreme Chancellor's office in the Executive Building. As Obi-Wan presented the report, struggling to maintain composure, Palpatine's reaction was immediate and unambiguous. This is categorically impossible, the Chancellor stated, his usual diplomatic composure giving way to bewilderment. I have never so much as set foot on Stujon. The analysis is fundamentally flawed. Incorrect, the report cannot be, Yoda insisted. Flawless, our genetic identification protocols are. When Palpatine insisted on immediate verification testing, the results returned with unequivocal clarity. No biological connection existed between the two men. Their genetic markers revealed such fundamental dissimilarity that any hypothetical shared ancestor would have lived in an era predating even the Old Republic's founding, some 25 millennia ago. Despite all parties' attempts at discretion, details of the incident leaked to several prominent holonet outlets, though exactly how remained suspiciously unclear. The story spread across the Republic within hours, prompting a statistician from the Coruscant Institute of Demographics to publicly note that even with the Bureau's vaunted 99.97% accuracy rate, the galactic population was vast enough that millions of beings could register as false positives, enough to populate a mid-sized planet entirely with Obi-Wan's supposed fathers. The Bureau's official statement attributed the error to anomalous data processing protocols in Ministry droids. Yoda dispatched a blistering formal complaint demanding systemic overhauls, citing unconscionable incompetence and damage to Jedi credibility. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan retreated into himself, devastated by both the emotional whiplash and the public humiliation. During quiet moments in the temple gardens, he wept openly, questioning what karmic debt he had incurred to merit such degradation. Though Anakin attempted to provide comfort, his efforts remained hampered by the impossible position he occupied, unable to reveal Yoda's orchestration of the entire debacle without jeopardizing his status as the Grand Master's designated successor. Yoda's amusement at Obi-Wan's misery, however, proved short-lived. The paternity test had revealed something far more intriguing. Palpatine possessed a suspiciously high midi-chlorian count. When questioned, the Chancellor dismissed it, joking that despite whatever genetic quirk caused such readings, he clearly lacked the disposition for Jedi asceticism. Yoda remained suspicious. Such a high count surely meant something significant and had undoubtedly contributed to Palpatine's rise to galactic leadership. Throughout his centuries of existence, Yoda had developed an almost religious reverence for beings with exceptional midi-chlorian measurements. He viewed Skywalker, his name's successor, with admiration, as the living embodiment of Force potential. Kenobi represented the opposite end of this spectrum, his comparatively modest count so unremarkable that Yoda privately wondered how the man had survived decades of combat without simply stumbling fatally over his own feet during battle. While projecting flawless courtesy during council proceedings, Yoda secretly regarded Kenobi as valuable primarily through his connection to Anakin, a biological curiosity whose greatest achievement was raising someone truly gifted. The Grand Master took pleasure in orchestrating situations that would subtly undermine Obi-Wan's confidence. Perhaps, Yoda often mused, this was the Force's actual purpose for Kenobi, to serve as a source of entertainment for his betters. This same preoccupation with midi-chlorian hierarchy now focused Yoda's attention squarely on Palpatine. In Yoda's hierarchical worldview, such Force potential couldn't exist without purpose. No ordinary politician could possess such readings without harboring hidden power. Perhaps the Chancellor concealed more than he revealed. So Yoda devised a test. During meetings with Palpatine, he would project the most vile mental insults imaginable, watching for any reaction that would reveal Force sensitivity. A flinch, a momentary grimace, even the slightest eye movement would confirm Palpatine's sensitivity to Force projections. This methodical examination continued across months of regular interaction. At each meeting, Yoda would maintain direct eye contact while transmitting increasingly offensive mental provocations. Yet meeting after meeting yielded nothing. No reaction, no subtle tell, no indication that Palpatine perceived anything beyond ordinary conversation. To all appearances, the Chancellor remained completely insensitive to these psychic assaults. Unbeknownst to Yoda, Palpatine, whose secret affiliation with an ancient Force cult would eventually come to light, detected every crude projection. He endured them in silence, his fury mounting with each meeting. The precise thought that finally shattered his tolerance remains a matter of speculation. Perhaps it was Yoda's mental taunt about having good relations with Palpatine's deceased mother, or the Grand Master's crude mental boast that she was a 5 when she drinks, but a 10 when on top of me. Whatever the final provocation, Palpatine resolved that retaliation had become necessary. The Chancellor never learned whether the report was deliberate sabotage or genuine error. It hardly mattered. The situation presented an opportunity to eliminate the Grand Master, who had been tormenting him for months. He extended a private invitation to Obi-Wan Kenobi. By this time, Kenobi had commenced sessions with a temple mind healer, a development Anakin had mentioned to Yoda out of concern for his former master's deteriorating mental state. The Grand Master had dismissed it callously. A bitch he is. Give a shit I do not. In the privacy of his chancellery suite, Palpatine revealed an intricate personal history before the increasingly captivated Jedi Master. He revealed his true lineage as the son of Kosinga Palpatine's sister and Master Khan Vera Dune, a maverick Jedi whose existence had been expunged from all official archives following his assassination. Rather than surrendering his Force-sensitive infant to the Order after his mother perished during childbirth, Master Vera Dune had chosen to train his son in secret, away from the Order's dogmatic constraints, ensuring him a life freer than that of a Jedi. Though Palpatine had followed his family's tradition by entering Naboo politics early in life, his path changed dramatically when his father discovered damning evidence of Yoda's elaborate conspiracy. According to Vera Dune's findings, the Grand Master had been manipulating galactic conflicts for decades, covertly diverting Republic funds to commission the clone army, while simultaneously guiding his former apprentice, Dooku, to assume leadership of the separatist movement. Shortly before Master Vera Dune intended to present this evidence to the Senate Intelligence Committee, he vanished, only to be discovered days later, clearly murdered, but staged as an accident. After his father's death, Palpatine transformed his political career into a covert mission. He would rise through the ranks of galactic leadership specifically to position himself where he could eventually expose and neutralize Yoda's machinations. For 5 long years, he methodically built alliances and gathered intelligence, patiently working toward the moment when opportunity and preparation would converge. That convergence finally arrived in the form of the Naboo crisis, a conflict that, ironically, Yoda himself had orchestrated through his Trade Federation proxies. By skillfully navigating this manufactured emergency, Palpatine secured the chancellorship, turning Yoda's own scheme against him and establishing the position of power needed for his ultimate plan. Throughout this ascension, Yoda remained completely oblivious to Palpatine's true nature and agenda, never once suspecting that the diplomatic politician from Naboo harbored any knowledge of the Force, let alone a personal vendetta against the Grand Master himself. The Chancellor then unveiled Obi-Wan's own position within this labyrinthine conspiracy. "I am your father, Obi-Wan," Palpatine said. He explained that during a covert mission to Stewjon under Varadun's direction, he had met a woman named Kira Satros, a local physician who aided his operation. Their connection was brief but intense. She had perished in childbirth, just as his own mother had. "Neither of us experienced maternal love," Palpatine observed with a hint of melancholy. "It's like poetry. It rhymes." According to Palpatine's narrative, when Obi-Wan was born, Master Varadun had experienced a powerful Force vision regarding the infant's future. Palpatine claimed his father had sensed an extraordinary purpose awaiting Obi-Wan, one that could only be fulfilled within the Jedi Order rather than with his real family. Despite his own reluctance to surrender his only son to an institution he distrusted, Palpatine ultimately honored Varadun's wish, arranging for the Force-sensitive infant to be discovered by the Jedi. Palpatine claimed that, as he'd observed Obi-Wan's development from afar, watching him become a man of profound principle, he'd been overwhelmed by paternal pride. In the days following Varadun's assassination, he said his first instinct had been to approach the 20-year-old Obi-Wan, to reveal their connection and enlist his help against Yoda's growing corruption, but that initial resolve gave way to protective fear. The Chancellor couldn't bear the thought of Obi-Wan meeting the same violent end as Varadun. This depth of feeling ultimately reinforced his decision to maintain distance, not for strategic advantage, but from a place of fierce protection. The Chancellor chose instead to honor his father's vision by allowing Obi-Wan's path to unfold untainted by their connection, trusting the Force's grand design even when it demanded the most painful personal sacrifice, watching his son from afar, never acknowledged, never embraced. The unexpected genetic database match had threatened to unravel everything. While he had manipulated the verification results to shield Obi-Wan from Yoda's vengeance, Palpatine now wondered if perhaps the droid malfunction represented the Force itself, reuniting father and son, a sign that fate intended them to face this challenge together, bound by blood and shared purpose. The Chancellor's story filled every inconsistency in Obi-Wan's understanding of recent galactic events, explaining the Clone Army's mysterious commissioning, Dooku's perfectly timed defection, and the pattern of escalating conflicts that invariably expanded Jedi authority. Each piece connected seamlessly to the next, creating a comprehensive alternative reality. Desperate to believe he'd finally found family, and that his growing disenchantment with the Order had legitimate foundations, Obi-Wan embraced the narrative. The explanation satisfied both his emotional and intellectual needs too perfectly to question. When Palpatine extended his arms in a paternal gesture, Obi-Wan stepped forward, embracing the man he now accepted as his father. Throughout the subsequent months, as Yoda continued his oblivious mental provocations during official meetings, Palpatine gradually shared his strategy with his son. "How will we accomplish this, Father?" Obi-Wan inquired during one of their clandestine conversations. Palpatine detailed the scheme. He would summon Yoda to his office under diplomatic pretense, while Obi-Wan would remain concealed nearby. The cornerstone of their plan involved the Salamiri, small reptilian creatures native to the Merkur system that evolved a remarkable natural defense mechanism, the ability to create force-neutralizing fields around themselves. In sufficient numbers, these creatures would generate an overlapping suppression zone encompassing the entire chamber. "Without his connection to the Force, Yoda can't even walk," Palpatine explained. Once the Grand Master was reduced to this vulnerable state, father and son would eliminate him together, ending his centuries-long manipulation of galactic affairs and ushering in an era of peace. In the days leading up to the confrontation, Palpatine repeatedly emphasized the paramount importance of discretion. Yoda's network of informants extends throughout the Republic, he warned. One careless word could unravel everything. On the appointed day itself, however, Obi-Wan found himself unable to maintain complete silence. He approached Anakin, the young man he had raised from childhood and regarded as family, to warn him away from potential danger. Knowing that Anakin routinely visited the Chancellor's office, Obi-Wan feared his former Padawan might inadvertently walk into the confrontation. In his emotional turmoil, Obi-Wan never paused to consider how Yoda's removal might impact Anakin's position as the Grand Master's designated successor. Anakin had always minimized the significance of this appointment, never leveraging it for special treatment or displaying any particular ambition regarding it. Obi-Wan confided everything. He spoke with the fervor of someone who believed he was finally acting righteously. "Avoid the Chancellor's office tonight, at all costs," he urged, clasping Anakin's shoulder firmly. "After Yoda faces justice for his crimes, we'll establish a new order, one genuinely committed to peace rather than power." Anakin nodded solemnly, assuring his former master he would keep his distance, while revealing nothing of his true intentions or the calculations already forming behind his composed expression. The moment Obi-Wan departed, Anakin hastened to Padmé's apartments, where he disclosed everything, from the fraudulent paternity test to the Grand Master's mental projection experiments, which Yoda had gleefully recounted to Anakin, to the disturbing scheme Obi-Wan and the Chancellor were now plotting to eliminate Yoda using force-nullifying creatures. They dissected the situation from every angle. Anakin knew beyond any doubt that the initial paternity report was fraudulent. After all, he and Yoda had fabricated it together. The astronomical improbability of Palpatine actually being Obi-Wan's father seemed definitive. And yet, Anakin couldn't entirely dismiss the possibility. The Force had manifested more improbable connections when its mysterious will demanded specific convergences. Regardless of whether the biological connection held any validity, regardless of whether Palpatine was manipulating Obi-Wan, or whether some unseen third party had orchestrated the entire sequence of events, certain facts remained undeniable. Obi-Wan genuinely believed Palpatine's account. Anakin had sensed no deception from his former master, only earnest conviction, and however bewildering the circumstances, Palpatine's allegations against Yoda aligned disturbingly well with behaviors they had independently observed. The Grand Master had consistently regarded Force sensitives as inherently superior beings. A conspiracy to position Force users as the galaxy's natural rulers would perfectly match Yoda's fundamental outlook. More unsettling still, Palpatine's narrative suddenly illuminated a constellation of previously disconnected mysteries. Dooku, Yoda's own former apprentice, emerging as separatist leader, precisely when the conflict required escalation. Sifo-Dyas conveniently disappearing after commissioning the clone army. An entire planet containing evidence of the army's creation being erased from Jedi archives. Pieces that had never quite aligned now formed a coherent, if horrifying, picture. And if such accusations gained traction, if Yoda's authority were successfully challenged, the succession arrangements he'd orchestrated would inevitably collapse, along with Anakin's designated path to leadership. Their debate expanded to include practical responses. Direct communication with Yoda proved impossible. A comm to the temple revealed he wasn't there, or at least no one could locate him, and the Grand Master famously refused to carry personal communication devices. His reasoning, as he'd explained to countless frustrated council members over the centuries, the Force provides all necessary guidance through its midi-chlorians. In plenty, I have them. Carry a comm, I will not. An insult to the Force, such crude instruments are, only weak Jedi need them. This peculiar philosophy had caused no shortage of problems during emergencies. Sending another Jedi to intervene introduced unpredictable variables. If additional Jedi arrived during the confrontation, they would inevitably investigate why a respected council member and the Supreme Chancellor were attempting to neutralize the Grand Master. Should that investigation confirm even fragments of Obi-Wan's allegations, Yoda's centuries of manipulation would be exposed to the full Order and Senate. Palpatine and Obi-Wan would emerge not as assassins, but as principled whistleblowers who had uncovered corruption at the highest level of galactic governance. This narrative would grant Palpatine unprecedented political capital as the courageous leader who exposed the puppet master behind decades of conflict, even reaching out to trusted Senate allies, risked information leakage that could trigger this exact scenario. Operating from defensive pessimism, as was their custom, the assessment was brutally pragmatic. If Yoda were eliminated or his authority undermined, Anakin's position as heir would instantly become meaningless. The Jedi Council had always viewed Anakin's unprecedented advancement as shameless favoritism, Yoda's nepotism project, rather than merit-based promotion. Several senior masters harbored undisguised resentment of this perceived preferential treatment. Without Yoda's protection, the Council would immediately convene to vote on new leadership, and they would almost certainly select anyone but Skywalker, likely someone from their established inner circle. Simultaneously, if Palpatine successfully exposed this grand conspiracy, the political consequences would prove equally devastating. He would undoubtedly be hailed as the Republic's savior, the leader who uncovered corruption at the highest levels of both government and Jedi Order. A grateful Senate would almost certainly grant him extended or even lifetime emergency powers. Such an outcome would obliterate Padmé's strategy. For years, she had methodically documented the administration's wartime failures while positioning herself as Palpatine's logical successor. A Palpatine vindicated as corruption fighter and hero would become politically invulnerable. Their decision emerged from something far beyond mere ambition. It sprang from a profound shared understanding between them. Both had experienced childhoods devoid of genuine family connection. Padmé raised by parents who viewed her exclusively as a political investment. Anakin abandoned by a mother who severed contact after his political marriage. The dynasty they were building represented something far more profound than power. It constituted the authentic family both had been denied throughout their lives. The Amidala Skywalker legacy would provide their children everything they had lacked: purpose, belonging, and unconditional acceptance. With cold resolve hardened by their shared history, they made a silent vow as the evening sun painted their apartment in amber light. No one, whether Yoda with his Force elitism, Palpatine with his suspicious paternal claims, Obi-Wan with his newfound zealotry, or any circumstance whatsoever, would threaten what they had built together or deny their future children their destined place in galactic history. Their family would endure, no matter what actions such preservation demanded. That night, Yoda arrived at the Chancellor's office, responding to Palpatine's urgent message regarding ecological regulations affecting Kashyyyk, a planet where the Grand Master maintained several investments. As the small Jedi entered the ornate chamber, Palpatine activated his security protocols with a subtle gesture, sealing all exits with an audible hiss. From a hidden side room, Obi-Wan appeared, carrying a reinforced containment unit, roughly the size of a travel case, by its overhead handle. The metallic box, dotted with finger-sized breathing holes on all sides, revealed its contents. 20 Salamiri specimens, slender creatures about a handspan long, packed tightly together, their scaled bodies shifting restlessly within the confined space. The moment Obi-Wan positioned the cage at the room's center, a sudden emptiness swept through the chamber. Their connection to the Force, that ever-present energy field that had sustained each of them throughout their lives, simply vanished. While all three felt the severance keenly, for Yoda, the effect was crippling. The Grand Master's very mobility depended on Force enhancement. Without it, his small frame struggled with even basic movement. "Master Obi-Wan?" Yoda's voice wavered, confusion replacing his typical authoritative tone. He stood before the Chancellor's desk, staring at his council member, now positioned beside Palpatine on the other side. Obi-Wan launched into an accusatory speech about Yoda's secret machinations, to which the Grand Master responded dismissively, "Dumb as shit you are. Your father, this now, young Master Yoda, you will die," Palpatine interrupted, igniting a blue lightsaber. Obi-Wan activating his own blade. They advanced on Yoda who, without the Force, crawled frantically beneath the Chancellor's massive desk for protection. The pair began slashing through the ornate furniture with their weapons. When they finally reached him, Palpatine dragged Yoda out by one leg and hurled him against the massive window behind the Supreme Chancellor's chair. The Grand Master slid down onto the wide sill and scrambled backward into the corner, where wall met transparent steel. To his right, the viewport overlooked Coruscant's nighttime sprawl. To his left, the office interior, where Palpatine now advanced with saber raised, Obi-Wan taking position beside him like a dutiful son. Yoda was trapped in the corner of the ledge, their twin blades converging on him with nowhere left to retreat. The office doors hissed open without warning, Palpatine's security protocols rendered useless by the sophisticated slicer spike Anakin had jammed into the control panel moments earlier. He and Senator Amidala rushed into the chamber, their sudden appearance shattering the executioner's focus. Startled by the intrusion, Palpatine's lightsaber veered sideways, striking the transparent steel window. The impact shattered the massive pane completely, exposing the office to Coruscant's high-altitude winds. A violent gale swept through the chamber as Padmé slowed her approach, methodically sweeping a datapad across the room as though conducting some precise environmental scan. Anakin moved toward the confrontation, his eyes darting between Obi-Wan, Palpatine, and the vulnerable Yoda. "Anakin!" Yoda called out. "Trying to kill me they are. Save me, you must. Crazy, these two are—" "Anakin, let us handle this," Obi-Wan interjected. "We're about to end this." "Indeed, Anakin," Palpatine added. A subtle shift in his tone suggested he'd instantly deduced Obi-Wan's betrayal of their confidence. Master Yoda engineered this entire conflict. We stand at the threshold of ending centuries of manipulation. Anakin stood motionless, taking in the scene before him. All players had positioned their pieces on the board, but the execution of their respective strategies now hinged on his next move. He must stand trial, Anakin finally declared to Obi-Wan and Palpatine. He has control of the Senate and the Council. He's too dangerous to be left alive, Palpatine countered. Found it, Padmé announced, positioned near the cage at the chamber's center. Anakin, control your wife, Obi-Wan shouted. What is she doing? Forgive me, Master, Anakin said, igniting his lightsaber. Do it, Padmé. With precision born of years of security training, Padmé extracted a compact detonator from a concealed pouch on her utility belt. She affixed the device directly to the Salamiri cage with a magnetic clamp, its activation sequence triggering immediately. The indicator display pulsed crimson, conforming to Republic Emergency Ordnance standards, silently counting down from 10 seconds to detonation. She backed away quickly, putting distance between herself and the imminent blast. Palpatine must have assessed the situation instantly. If the creatures died, Yoda would regain his connection to the Force. Even with Kenobi's help, facing the Grand Master at full strength would be certain death, and Skywalker had clearly aligned himself with Amidala and Yoda. The Chosen One would never side with him over his wife and their future together. A single possibility presented itself. If he could reach that detonator, disable it before those creatures perished, Obi-Wan might have just enough heartbeats to end Yoda, while the Grand Master remained vulnerable. The bond between Master and former Padawan ran deep. Skywalker would hesitate to strike down the man who raised him. That moment of restraint might be enough. The narrow path between survival and obliteration narrowed with each passing second as he made his choice. A fool's gamble, perhaps, but in the rapidly constricting geometry of possible futures, it was the only move remaining on the board. Son, destroy Yoda, Palpatine commanded, launching himself toward the cage. His azure blade cut through the air as he sprinted across the chamber floor. Anakin's pulse hammered in his throat. For one suspended heartbeat, his muscles tensed toward both opponents at once, then pivoted, decisive toward Obi-Wan. He trusted Padmé completely. Without Force augmentation, Palpatine was merely an aging bureaucrat facing a woman not only 3 decades younger but trained in Naboo's elite security forces since childhood. Seeing Palpatine's approach, Padmé drew her blaster. Before she could fire, he hurled his lightsaber toward her. She dove sideways to avoid the blade, and the impact jarred the blaster from her grip. It skittered across the floor. Palpatine's lightsaber clattered against the far wall and deactivated. Those fractured seconds, just enough. Palpatine's fingers, liver-spotted but precise, found the detonator. Its display pulsed accusingly. 5 seconds of possibility. 4. 3. His fingertip pressed the abort sequence, and the crimson countdown froze, trapped between moments like an insect in amber. Palpatine whirled toward Padmé's landing spot and found only empty space, until twin shadows darkened his vision from above. Her boost connected with his face in a perfectly executed dropkick, the impact resonating through his skull with a dull, sickening thud. Copper flooded his mouth as teeth sliced through the soft inner tissue of his cheek, the metallic tang of his own blood momentarily overwhelming his senses. His consciousness fragmented into bright islands of pain floating in darkness. He lurched backward, fingers scrambling against the cold bronze of the Duarte statue for any stability in a suddenly untethered world. Sistros Nevet's impassive metal face stared down at him, the ancient philosopher's cold expression, a mocking contrast to his own undignified desperation. Before the shattered pieces of his awareness could reassemble into coherent thought, Padmé had already transformed her vulnerability into advantage. Her body coiled then released in one fluid motion, a perfect kip-up that brought her from supine to standing in a heartbeat. She settled into the distinctive combat stance of Naboo's royal guards, weight perfectly balanced, hands raised palm out, fingers slightly curved. Padmé hadn't gone for her fallen blaster. She'd seen Palpatine deactivate the device, heard the abort sequence chime as the countdown froze. If he opened that cage, 20 Salamiri would scatter across the chamber, fast creatures, nearly impossible to shoot while darting about. She had calculated the risk and the space between heartbeats. Even if she reached the blaster, even if her shot found its mark, he might release the creatures first. The Force would remain nullified throughout the chamber, and Anakin had admitted he might not be able to kill Obi-Wan when it mattered. Her priority had snapped into focus with cold clarity. Incapacitate Palpatine directly, get him away from that cage immediately, then destroy the creatures, restoring Yoda's powers, and securing both her husband's succession and her own political trajectory. The dropkick was the faster option. They faced each other across the gleaming floor, political children of Naboo, embodying the ancient proverb whispered in the planet's shadow politics. When two from Naboo contest the same throne, one returns to the planet's embrace. The calculation in Palpatine's eyes faltered as Padmé advanced, her movements liquid and precise, the cold efficiency of youth against his weathered cunning. His right cross cut through stale, office air. Padmé's forearm intercepted the blow, bone meeting bone with a dull thud that reverberated through her marrow. In the same heartbeat, her right fist launched toward his exposed throat, not a punch, but a spear hand strike, aimed at his trachea. Palpatine's fingers locked around her wrist, a momentary victory extinguished as Padmé transformed capture into catastrophe. She yanked downward, his body's momentum becoming her weapon as she drove her forehead against the delicate architecture of his nose. Cartilage collapsed with a wet crunch that sent electric pleasure through her combat-heightened senses. Dazed and bleeding, his fingers released her. Padmé seized both elbows in a vice grip, pinning his arms as she delivered a staccato rhythm of headbutts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each impact punctuated by a short, guttural grunt that escaped through clenched teeth. The bridge of his nose broke fully, cheekbones fracturing. His aristocratic features dissolved into a crimson ruin, blood painting his pale skin in rivulets. She pulled back, locking eyes with him, and released a primal scream, raw and triumphant, before driving her knee savagely into his groin. The impact doubled him over, his body folding forward as pain radiated through his core. Padmé released his elbows and shoved both hands against his shoulders, the force driving him backward. He landed hard on his tailbone, half sitting, instinctively trying to push himself upright through the agony. He never made it. Padmé's boot caught him square in the chest. Before his spine fully connected with the floor, her knee was already descending. It dropped onto his sternum with her full body weight behind it. A strike that broke multiple ribs beneath the expensive fabric of his robes. The crack of bone punctuated his wheezing gasp as air forcibly evacuated his lungs. Her hands found his throat, fingers wrapping around his neck and squeezing. Decades of political calculation and manipulation condensed into this most primitive struggle, the desperate need for air. His fingers clawed at her forearms with diminishing strength, nails carving shallow trenches in her skin. Thin crimson lines bloomed where he broke the surface, blood she didn't register through the crystalline focus of combat. 5 seconds, his face flushed deep red, blood vessels straining against the surface as pressure mounted in his skull. 10 seconds, the crimson deepened to aubergine, the capillaries in his eyes rupturing into a web of scarlet. His bulging eyes locked with hers, terror giving way to comprehension. In those final moments, understanding passed between them. The senator from Naboo would author the final line of his story. 15 seconds, his resistance collapsed into stillness. She shifted her grip instantly, jaw and skull. One sharp, twisting wrench, vertebrae separated, with a sound like frozen branches snapping in winter air. His head lolled at an unnatural angle, cervical spine severed. She released her hold on the empty vessel that had once been Sheev Palpatine and rose to her feet, lungs working like bellows. Blood from her lacerated forehead trickled down her face onto the tactical bodysuit beneath her outer layer of clothing. With a single motion, she swept matted hair from her face, then moved with purpose toward the cage. Her blood-slicked fingers reactivated the detonator. The indicator pulsed to life. Crimson warning, 10-second promise, 90 seconds from first strike to final heartbeat. Behind her, framed by Coruscant's endless skyline, Anakin faced the impossible choice between his former master and the Grand Master who had shaped his destiny. While Padmé dealt with Palpatine, Anakin focused on extracting Obi-Wan from the situation. "Listen to me," Anakin urged. His ignited lightsaber pointed toward the floor. "He's been manipulating, silent," Yoda's voice cracked like a whip. "At the mercy of this low, midi-chlorian freak, I am not." The Grand Master's eyes narrowed to glittering slits, his form trembling not with fear, but with contempt. "Worth less than the dirt beneath my feet, he is. Failed Jedi, failed father, failed master, failed man." Each syllable landed like acid on bare skin. Anakin watched Obi-Wan's transformation with growing dread, a physical metamorphosis as reason evacuated his body. First came the jaw, muscles bunching beneath beard-stubbled skin, teeth grinding audibly in the chamber's tense atmosphere. Then his neck, a single vein pulsing in urgent rhythm against his throat, mapping the accelerating heartbeat beneath. His left hand formed a white-knuckled fist, while his right maintained its death grip on his ignited lightsaber, the blue blade unwavering as it pointed at Yoda. His breathing, shallow, irregular gasps, seemed to draw insufficient oxygen, the desperate rhythm of a man whose rage was consuming him. In that moment, Obi-Wan Kenobi, the negotiator, voice of reason throughout the Clone Wars, architect of 1,000 peaceful resolutions, disappeared entirely. What remained was something primal, wounded, and infinitely more dangerous. Anakin's thoughts accelerated, piecing together the lethal puzzle before him. Two possibilities materialized. Yoda was deliberately baiting Obi-Wan into violence, creating a scenario where Anakin would have to strike down his former master to protect his benefactor. A twisted loyalty test, or perhaps something rawer was at work. After centuries as the galaxy's most revered Force wielder, Yoda simply couldn't stomach being rendered powerless before a man he'd always regarded as barely worthy of notice. The ancient master's pride might be proving more dangerous than his cunning. "Your mother," Yoda sneered. Offering friends and family discount, she was. White foam had begun forming at the corners of his mouth, bubbling between his lips as words poured out in an uncontrollable torrent. Anakin was shouting, trying to wedge his voice between the taunts and the rage, but it was like screaming at a hurricane. His pleas for restraint dissolved into background static, unregistered by a man too far gone to hear them. Obi-Wan's face contorted with pure hatred. He heard nothing beyond Yoda, not Anakin, not the struggle behind him, not the broken windows wind. His universe had contracted to a single point, the small green figure before him, target of all his accumulated rage. Anakin, however, registered her voice amid the chaos, that distinctive cadence she produced when extinguishing a life. It wasn't the first time he'd heard it. Over the years, they'd accumulated a certain shared experience in such matters. "Hang on," Luke interrupted the rhythm of the story. "Not the first time. Exactly how many?" "Luke? Yes? Will you please shut the f*** up and let me finish? You can ask questions at the end." "Fine," he snapped. Padmé held his gaze for a beat, then added, "Lara Emerald. What a stupid name." Luke stared at her, exhaustion settling into his features. Okay, she said. "So, while I was dealing with Palpatine, Anakin was handling his own situation." Anakin watched as Obi-Wan raised his lightsaber, the blade transitioning from its lowered position to high above his head. The blue plasma hummed with deadly intent as it reached its apex, poised for execution. In that suspended moment before descent, that fraction of a second where potential energy gathered before converting to motion, Anakin saw his window closing. "I need him," Anakin screamed, pitching his voice above the wind and insults, a final raw escalation. Obi-Wan didn't register the plea, didn't hesitate, his blade beginning its first increment downward. The decision moved through Anakin's body before his mind could catch it, muscles contracting, weight shifting forward. "No!" The sound ripped from somewhere deeper than his throat. His arm swung in the arc Obi-Wan had taught him, the same fluid motion they'd drilled together for years, master correcting students' form until the blade moved like breathing. The lightsaber met flesh and bone. The smell hit him first, burning meat, cauterized tissue. Obi-Wan's scream tore through the wind. High, broken, a sound Anakin had never heard from him. Not in battle, not ever. His eyes found Anakin's, and for one suspended heartbeat, only that look mattered. Recognition collapsing into betrayal, the expression of a man watching his world rewrite itself. His severed hand tumbled through the air, fingers still locked around the lightsaber hilt, and hit the floor with a thud. At that precise moment across the chamber, the detonator reached zero. The explosion consumed the Salamiri cage in a burst of light and superheated metal. The creatures inside vaporized instantly, their bodies reduced to ash and heat. The acrid stench of burning flesh and scorched metal rolled across the chamber. The force didn't simply return, it crashed into the chamber like a tidal wave breaking through a crumbling seawall. For Yoda, the transformation was unremarkable in the physical world. He simply rose to his feet, his ancient body suddenly unburdened. But through the force, Anakin perceived the true magnitude of the change. In that invisible dimension that connected all living things, the ancient being's force signature blazed with cosmic intensity, a supernova of power accumulated through 9 centuries of existence. The raw energy emanated from his small form in pulsing waves, creating ripples in the force that threatened to overwhelm Anakin's senses. Yoda's 3-fingered hand thrust forward, the gesture sharp and decisive as a weapon strike. Obi-Wan's scream cut off mid-note, replaced by a strangled gasp as invisible pressure seized his windpipe. His body lurched upward, boots lifting from the floor as Yoda suspended him in the air, dangling helplessly near the shattered window. The yawning drop to Coruscant's depths just to his left. Frigid wind tore through the opening, whipping his robes into a frenzy around his suspended form. His remaining hand clawed desperately at his throat, fingers scrabbling against skin that bore no visible marks, yet collapsed inward beneath 3 invisible digits. "Pathetic," Yoda snarled, slowly tightening his grip as he savored the extinguishing of life. Your father, dead he is. Yoda's invisible grip wrenched his head to the right, forcing his gaze across the chamber, where Palpatine's body lay crumpled amid scattered debris from the exploded cage, neck broken, lifeless. Yes, look upon him. Kill him, you did. The weakness flows in your blood, it does. Weak bloodline, weak father, weak son, ends today, it does. Obi-Wan's cauterized stump lifted, trembling, fighting against gravity and dying strength, reaching toward the corpse across the chamber. A single tear traced down his contorted face, the only visible sign of anguish beneath the strangulation. But through the Force, his devastation blazed outward, grief and self-hatred and unbearable loss crashing together, the emotional destruction far more complete than any physical wound. Yoda twisted his gnarled fingers. Now, young deadbeat, you will die. Cartilage and bone snapped as Obi-Wan's windpipe collapsed, the sound lost beneath the howling wind. The light in his eyes faded while they remained fixed on Palpatine's corpse, his final moments poisoned by a connection that never existed. With a contemptuous flick of his wrist, Yoda hurled Kenobi's lifeless body through the fractured viewport. It tumbled silently into Coruscant's depths, swallowed by darkness and the indifferent river of distant traffic flowing kilometers below. It had happened in moments, a terrible sequence Anakin observed from some disembodied vantage point beyond himself. His consciousness had retreated to a strange, liminal space where thought fragmented before completion, where intervention remained an abstract concept never translated to muscle and motion. Just witness, never participant. Yoda's fingers twisting, the percussion of breaking bone, the dark silhouette of his master vanishing through shattered, transparent steel into endless night, complete. Now he sank against a nearby pillar, sliding down until he sat on the floor. 3 meters away, Obi-Wan's severed hand rested, fingers curved in rigor around the lightsaber's hilt. The weapon that had saved Anakin's life countless times now rendered inert, its blue heart extinguished like its master's. Anakin's tongue tasted copper, though he hadn't bitten it. His throat constricted, though no invisible hand squeezed it. His master, the architect of his skills, the voice in his head during every negotiation, existed now only as memory and a cooling fragment of flesh. In that space between ability and action, between power and its application, Anakin had found the exact dimension of his own complicity. "What have I done?" Anakin whispered, not to anyone present but to the Force itself, to the silent universe that had witnessed and demanded this choice. A sound from behind. He turned to find Padmé approaching, and rose instantly to his feet. The laceration on her forehead was already sealed by medical spray. She moved into his space and collapsed against his chest. His arms encircled her automatically, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other steadied her at the waist. "Are you hurt?" they asked almost in unison, then fell silent. Yoda hobbled toward them, seemingly invigorated rather than shaken by the violence. Some Force cultist, Palpatine was. Correct, I was, all along. Remorse found no purchase on his withered countenance as he cast a bored glance toward the jagged precipice, toward the infinite neon deep that had claimed the pitiful punchline. And Obi-Wan went insane, he did. Weak, pathetic little failure, he always was. In hell he is. The Grand Master looked between them appraisingly. "Saved me you have, Anakin. Proven yourself worthy as my successor you have. And Senator Amidala," his voice took on an almost ceremonial quality, "the new Chancellor you will become. The Order's full support you have." Padmé smiled thinly and glanced at Anakin, recognizing the hollow devastation in his eyes. She couldn't summon even artificial sympathy for Obi-Wan's demise. In her assessment, he had always been fundamentally contemptible, a man who abandoned his own child, manipulated the courts to extract alimony from his ex-wife, and dismissed enslaved beings as pathetic life forms, unworthy of liberation. Yet she understood the conflict churning beneath Anakin's silence. Over a decade of brotherhood had been violently dismantled tonight. Even if the severance was essential for their survival, the wound it left was undeniable. By sunrise, the story had flooded every HoloNet node across the Republic, broadcast through official channels, verified by Senate intelligence feeds, echoed across millions of datapads and holoterminals. Chancellor Palpatine had been exposed as a member of an ancient dark side cult called the Sith, who called himself Darth Evis. His secret apprentice, Obi-Wan Kenobi, now branded Darth Negocius, had conspired with him to assassinate Grand Master Yoda and seize control of galactic governance. Senator Amidala's coalition had grown suspicious of Palpatine over the preceding years. Her network, senators, aides, officials who shared her concerns about executive overreach, had been monitoring the Chancellor quietly. They'd intercepted communications between Palpatine and Kenobi, discussing a plan to eliminate Yoda, then fabricate evidence linking the Grand Master to Separatist leadership and paint him as corrupt. With the clones under Palpatine's direct command and uncertainty about which Jedi might be compromised, Amidala had taken the information to the one Jedi she knew could be trusted, Skywalker. Together, they'd rushed to the Chancellor's office that night, arriving just as the Sith trap was springing. Fragmentary security footage from the Chancellor's office, conveniently degraded by electromagnetic interference, showed just enough. Palpatine and Kenobi wielding lightsabers, a cage of exotic creatures later identified as Force-suppressing Islamiri, and the violent confrontation that ensued. The Jedi Council's official explanation described how these creatures created dead zones in the Force, a cowardly ambush tactic employed by the weak to cripple the strong. The public record credited Amidala with destroying the Islamiri using an explosive charge, restoring Yoda's connection to the Force before she personally eliminated Palpatine in the ensuing chaos. Meanwhile, Skywalker had confronted his former master, who refused surrender, forcing him to sever Kenobi's weapon hand in defense of the Grand Master. Yoda, powers restored, had then neutralized the Sith threat permanently. This version of events, supported by the convenient absence of contradictory voices, gained immediate credibility through Yoda's testimony. To heighten the conspiracy's credibility, Yoda fabricated the Sith plot's ultimate endgame. Palpatine intended to accuse the entire Jedi Council of treason, then turn the clones against their generals. With the Order's leadership liquidated, the Chancellor planned to install his apprentice, Kenobi, as the new Grand Master, a puppet leader for a Sith-controlled Jedi Order. The plan's elegance made it believable. The public absorbed the story without question, terrified by how close the Republic had come to total collapse. Within weeks, Yoda formally transferred leadership of the Order to Anakin in an elaborate temple ceremony, citing his advanced age and Anakin's demonstrated loyalty. The succession became official, absolute. Shortly after, Yoda announced his retirement to Kashyyyk, leaving the Order entirely in his successor's hands. Padmé, meanwhile, rose to the Chancellorship, the Republic's new foundation after Palpatine's treachery. The galaxy had its heroes and villains cleanly divided. The good had won. Holonet celebrations stretched for days as the Senate accepted greater Jedi oversight, positioning the Order as the Republic's shield against any future Sith threat. Anakin, now Grand Master and the most recognized face in galactic governance, commanded near universal devotion. His wife, Chancellor Amidala, inspired equal reverence. Public discourse around traditional term limits began shifting subtly. Opinion pieces, questioning their necessity, emerged first from obscure academic journals, then prominent political commentators, finally reaching mainstream channels with suspicious synchronicity. The groundswell appeared organic to most observers, though those with connections to Senate intelligence noted the curious involvement of several independent civic foundations with financial ties to Naboo philanthropists. The war concluded a year later through a series of events that baffled military strategists. Without apparent cause, the once coordinated Separatist leadership disintegrated into chaos. Count Dooku and General Grievous, formerly aligned in lockstep, suddenly engaged in a blood feud. The Trade Federation, banking clan, and other corporate powers withdrew their support. The Separatist Parliament, previously united in opposition to Republic authority, fractured into hostile factions. Military historians would later describe the collapse as synchronized self-destruction, as though some unseen conductor had abandoned the orchestra mid-performance, leaving each section to play discordant notes until silence fell. Republic forces, facing an enemy suddenly at war with itself, methodically eliminated the fragmented resistance. Public worship of the Amidala-Skywalker partnership grew beyond politics into cultural obsession. Holonet channels spliced their appearances into viral compilations, while fan communities emerged across every sector, their devotion approaching religious fervor. Entertainment feeds circulated stories of the couple's supernatural connection, finishing each other's sentences, communicating without words. When they appeared unchanged year after year, whispers of Force-granted immortality spread until official doctrine made it truth. The Amidala-Skywalker dynasty was blessed with eternal youth, divine guardians shepherding civilization toward everlasting peace. Part 3. The Ramp. And that, my dear son, Padmé concluded, is the true story of how we rose to power. So no, I will not allow you to carelessly bestow our name upon some spice-peddling opportunist who caught your eye. Have I made myself clear? Luke stared at her, mouth slightly open. How much of this was true, he finally managed. Most of it, Padmé replied. I took some creative liberties, filled in gaps here and there, but the core, probably 80% accurate. Luke sat slumped, eyes on the floor, his face empty. What are you sad about? Padmé asked, noticing his reaction. Luke shook his head. That man Kenobi, he didn't deserve it. Well, that man Kenobi was a terrible person who nearly destroyed everything we built, Padmé countered. If we hadn't intervened, I'm not certain what would have happened, but it wouldn't have been good. Yoda had no grand scheme as it turned out, but Palpatine was definitely plotting something. Nobody bothered investigating after he died, myself included, but whatever died with him would have eventually crushed all our ambitions. Palpatine couldn't remain alive. Obi-Wan couldn't remain alive. Yoda had to survive. She waved dismissively. Besides, Luke, this Obi-Wan was a deadbeat father to his own child, despised slaves, and, this is absolutely true, tried to sell my entire wardrobe when we were marooned on Tatooine, quite possibly to finance his spice habit. The galaxy lost nothing of value that night. Luke fell back against his seat, staring up at the ceiling. I wish you hadn't told me all this. Well, you made me, Padmé shot back. Now you know exactly how crazy your father and I are. Happy? I'm sorry if I shattered whatever perfect image you had of him. Her tone sharpened. Actually, I'm not sorry. Now you can hate both of us instead of blaming me for everything. I don't hate anybody. Oh, how noble. Guess that makes you crazy too, then. Luke kept his eyes fixed on the ceiling, refusing the bait. Padmé exhaled through her nose. Stop being dramatic. It's not like we orchestrated the whole thing. Palpatine was unhinged. Obi-Wan was delusional. Yoda was a psychopath. They created the situation. We just adapted. She gestured broadly. Because we did, you get to rule the galaxy instead of, I don't know, dying of thirst on some outer rim dust ball. I don't rule anything, Luke muttered. Please, you have our ears and our wallets, you ungrateful little... I never wanted anyone's ear. Oh, what about the wallets? I have my own. Right, your little corporate ventures. Padmé tapped her temple mockingly. How could I forget? Luke Amidala Skywalker, self-made trillionaire. How inspiring. You should write a book about it. Help all those other poor souls in the galaxy replicate your success. Chapter 1. Be born to the Supreme Chancellor and Grand Master of the Jedi Order. Chapter 2. Prophet. I'm sure it'll be a bestseller. Luke wasn't listening anymore, his gaze distant. Luke? Padmé waved her left hand before his face, then gripped his far shoulder with her right hand, shaking him lightly. Still with me? You mad? What happened to... he began, but an alert chimed on the comm at her left wrist. They were approaching the landing zone. She rose and moved to the table, lifting her headdress, a bronze-toned halo of orichalc metal with turquoise pendants suspended from delicate silver chains, the flower of life emblem at its center catching the cabin's ambient light. Go on, she said, turning back toward Luke as she raised the headdress to her head. What happened to what? The headdress settled into position, the skull cap fitting snugly. She moved to stand before Luke, the cabin exit at her right, ready for their departure. The Grand Master, Yoda, what happened to him? Padmé's tone turned unnervingly solemn. About Yoda. It's rather dark, Luke. I'm not sure you can handle it. Luke straightened, suddenly attentive. Tell me. Well, she began, her voice taking on an ominous quality. He spent about 2 years in his retirement on Kashyyyk before the incident. Apparently he disrespected some Wookiee chieftain by suggesting his midi-chlorian count needed testing. Insisted they should speak basic like civilized beings instead of howling like animals. The tribe took particular offense when he kept calling their sacred food disgusting tree paste. She remained perfectly serious. They ate him, alive, started with the ears. Luke blinked at her, speechless. Padmé held the grave look for 3 more seconds before it shattered. She laughed, then mimicked his expression, eyes wide, mouth slightly open in horror. See, this is how you look. She did it again, exaggerating the shock even more. I'm only 60% sure you're joking. Story time's over, Padmé announced. She kicked his boot with her own. Come on, we have a prestigious credit laundering scheme to attend. And I need you holding my arm down that ramp, unless you want to watch your mother tumble, snap her neck, and die. She yanked him upright. They headed out, guards materializing and falling into formation behind them. By the time they reached the sealed boarding ramp, the entire detail had arranged itself. Security personnel standing in crisp lines, postures perfect, creating an imposing backdrop of living statuary. Padmé and Luke stood at the front, waiting. Luke stared ahead at the sealed ramp, his mind elsewhere, somewhere beyond the polished metal before him. Padmé glanced at him. "Where are you? Off with Ruby Diamond somewhere?" "No," Luke replied, not looking at her. "I'm still in that office." Well, it did have a nice view. Think you could have done what we did?" "What?" "What we did. Could you have done it?" Luke turned his eyes to her. "I couldn't strangle a 60-year-old man to death. I couldn't stand by watching as some delusional Jedi who thought he was trying to protect the Republic with his long-lost father was brutally murdered. I couldn't cut off someone's hand and just watch him die. No." A look resembling pride crossed Padmé's face. She raised her left hand to grip his right shoulder. The gesture was brief, a small shake before letting go. As they stood waiting, Luke found himself wondering if Leia had been right all along. His sister had severed ties with the family like cutting a gangrenous limb, abandoned their name, and repeatedly urged him to do the same and return to Naboo. She'd always insisted their parents were dangerously unhinged psychopaths, that he only ever saw the best in people and could be manipulated with the smallest kindness. Was there truth to that? The question coiled around his thoughts like a serpent. "Luke, ramp, snap out of it. Hold my arm. I'm scared." Padmé's plea shattered his thoughts, ancient fear trumping present power as mechanisms whirred to life. He surfaced from his thoughts and took her upper left arm, the gesture automatic after years of repetition. Through the haze of murder confessions and dynasty politics, he suddenly remembered his mother's irrational fear of descending ship ramps without someone holding her. She'd fallen face first running down one as a child, lost a tooth. The fear had persisted for decades, calcified into ritual, and she'd never bothered trying to overcome it. Fear of rams seems illogical for someone who prides herself on pragmatism, Luke observed, unable to resist the minor rebellion. "Intellectually, I understand all the reasons," she said, throwing his earlier words back at him. "But that doesn't change how I feel about it, though. Now, forget your little gem merchant for a moment. Leave the psychotic Jedi in that office. Anakin's down there somewhere. The three of us should talk about all this properly." Luke held her arm steadily as she continued. "Here we go." She breathed as the ramp lowered, light flooding in, not gentle but invasive. Below, cam drones hovered at prescribed distances, mechanical insects hungry for the perfect image. Guards lined the red carpet leading toward the exhibition entrance, while beyond the security barriers, crowds had gathered, their faces turned upward, hoping to glimpse the Eternal Chancellor and her family, living gods descended to walk among mortals. The moment they appeared, every camera focused, capturing the perfect tableau, the Supreme Chancellor in her magnificent headdress, radiant and untouched by time, her loyal son at her side, security personnel following at a respectful distance. As they descended, Luke's mind sifted through everything she'd revealed, fragments of horror and calculation tumbling through his consciousness. His thoughts kept circling back to one question. What exactly had Yoda been doing on, he caught himself, enough? For a few hours he just wanted to exist. No dynasty, no history, no questions.